The sky was painted in fading shades of orange and purple as dusk settled over the elite neighborhood of Gulberg. The air was warm, yet Aliza shivered. She stood motionless outside the wrought iron gates of a grand white mansion, its high walls casting long shadows across the road. Her heavily pregnant belly pressed against the worn fabric of her camise, and her back ached from the weight of exhaustion and betrayal. Her suitcase lay slumped beside her, one wheel broken, the zipper half open. A few baby clothes peeked out, touching the dust-covered ground. Her feet, swollen and bruised, bore the marks of miles walked in desperation. Her dupatta clung to her shoulder, soaked in sweat and tears. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, not from fear, but from disbelief. She had never imagined this day would come. Inside the mansion, chandeliers glowed brightly. Laughter spilled out from the open terrace, the sound of glasses clinking, music playing, and heels clicking on marble. Her husband, Ramiz, was hosting a party, and by his side, draped in red silk and dripping in diamonds, was Kinza, the woman for whom Aliza had been discarded. With a low mechanical creak, the gates shut behind her. The cold clang of metal echoed like a final judgment. The life she had built, the home she had cared for, had cast her out. But she wasn't alone. Across the road, behind the tinted window of a parked black car, someone watched the entire scene. Her sharp eyes didn't blink, her expression unreadable. It was Begum Shanaz, Ramiz's mother. And unlike the people in the mansion, she wasn't smiling. It had been the wedding of the year. Aliza could still remember the shimmering lights that adorned the grand marquee, the fresh jasmine garlands that lined every table, and the gold-embroidered lehenga she wore that made her look like a princess stepping out of a dream. Guests had flown in from London, Dubai, and New York. Celebrities mingled with politicians, and the media couldn't get enough of the love story between Ramiz Shah, heir to one of Pakistan's wealthiest business empires, and Aliza, the beautiful, soft-spoken girl raised by her widowed aunt in a modest Karachi apartment. Theirs had been called a modern-day fairy tale by a popular fashion magazine. Aliza had smiled in every photo, overwhelmed by the sudden spotlight, clinging to Ramiz's arm like he was both her anchor and her wings. He had whispered sweet nothings in her ear, kissed her forehead in front of cameras, and promised her the world behind closed doors. But the world he had promised slowly began to shrink. The first few months after marriage were blissful. Ramiz would take her to lavish dinners, surprise her with jewelry, and defend her shy nature to society's vultures. Aliza, grateful and wide-eyed, had poured herself into learning how to be the perfect wife of a millionaire. She mastered the mansion's rhythms, from supervising the staff to understanding the customs of high society. She never asked for anything.
She didn't know how to.
But slowly, the laughter at dinner faded. Ramiz stopped coming home early. Meetings stretched longer. Business trips grew more frequent. At first, Aliza thought it was the pressure of work, of carrying his father's legacy on young shoulders. She tried to be supportive, patient. Then came the late-night phone calls. The hushed whispers in corners. The smell of perfume that wasn't hers. The sudden, unexplained purchases, a diamond bracelet, a designer purse, none of which reached her hands. Still, she didn't ask. She prayed instead. She lit incense in the small prayer corner she'd made in the garden and prayed for her marriage, her home, her husband's heart. When she found out she was pregnant, she dared to hope again. She imagined their child, perhaps a son with Ramiz's eyes or a daughter with his wit. She decorated the nursery herself, choosing soft yellows and pastel greens. She started wearing her dupatta differently, like her mother-in-law had once shown her. She cooked Ramiz's favorite meals, waiting each night for the key to turn in the lock. But the man who used to bring her roses now brought silence. And eventually, even that disappeared. It was a whisper from the maid that first shattered her illusions. Something about Madame Kinza coming over when Aliza was away. Then it was a lipstick stain on a collar. A dinner bill from a 5-star restaurant she never visited. A selfie she saw accidentally on Ramiz's tablet. Kinza, pouting in the passenger seat of his car, wearing sunglasses Aliza had gifted Ramiz on their first anniversary. She confronted him once. He smiled, kissed her forehead, and told her she was imagining things. Pregnancy hormones, he said, chuckling as he walked away. She wanted to believe him, so desperately, but the warmth had vanished from his eyes, and the hand that used to hold hers now held secrets. The golden marriage, once polished and perfect, had started to tarnish, and Aliza, the girl who had dreamed of fairy tales, found herself trapped in a castle built on lies. It began innocently enough, at least that's how Ramiz made it seem. "Aliza, this is Kinza," he had said one morning at breakfast, walking in with a tall, impeccably dressed young woman whose heels clicked confidently on the marble floor of the dining room. "She's helping us restructure the digital side of the business." Very sharp. Harvard graduate. Kinza smiled with perfect teeth and eyes that never reached warmth. "It's such an honor to meet you, Mrs. Shah," she said sweetly, her manicured hands folded neatly in front of her. Aliza managed a polite nod. The baby inside her gave a soft kick, as if warning her that something was off. Over the following weeks, Kinza's presence grew like an infection. At first she came for meetings, then dinners, then overnights, claiming she had to finalize reports late into the night with Ramiz. And Ramiz, who had once insisted Aliza rest and avoid stress, now dismissed her concerns entirely. "She's just an employee, Aliza," he said one night as he loosened his tie and poured himself a drink. "Not everything is about you. Maybe if you focused on your health and stopped being so emotional, we could talk like adults." "But she stays here," Aliza whispered, trying to keep the tremble out of her voice. "She wears your shirts. She answers the phone in our room." Ramiz laughed, not kindly but the cold, pitiful kind of laugh that slashed deeper than words. "You're paranoid. Hormonal. You've been cooped up too long. Maybe you need help." He left her standing in the hallway, barefoot and speechless. Kinza, meanwhile, knew how to play every role. To the business partners, she was efficient. To the staff, she was generous with tips. To the society women, she was fashionable and charming. And to Ramiz, she was the prize he flaunted without shame. Slowly, Aliza began noticing changes around her. The cook started forgetting her meal preferences. Her favorite maid was reassigned to help Madame Kinza. Family portraits were taken down from the central hallway and replaced with modern abstract art. Kinza's taste, not hers. The old housekeeper, who had been with the Shahs for decades, began avoiding eye contact with Aliza altogether. And Ramiz, he was no longer her husband. He was a man living with a woman he desired, while the mother of his unborn child wandered the mansion like a ghost. Aliza tried one last time. She waited until Kinza left for a spa appointment and approached Ramiz in his study. "I don't know what's happening to us," she said, voice low, "but I'm still your wife. This is still our home." Ramiz didn't look up from his tablet. "No, Aliza," he said coolly. "This stopped being your home the day you started imagining enemies." Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't cry. She just stood there, her hands resting protectively over her belly. That night, she walked into her bedroom and stopped dead. It was empty. Her wardrobe, gone. The pictures on her nightstand, vanished. The baby's clothes she'd folded just yesterday, nowhere. The bed was made, with new sheets. Kinza's perfume hung in the air. Aliza turned around and found Ramiz leaning against the doorway. "I've moved your things to the guest room." "I need space," he said flatly. "But..." "It's done," he interrupted, his voice final. "Don't make a scene. You're embarrassing yourself." The door shut behind him, leaving her in the hallway, stripped of dignity, of identity, and now, even a place to sleep. For the first time since their marriage, Aliza understood. She wasn't losing him. She had already lost him. The night sky wept with her. Rain fell in heavy sheets as Aliza stood outside the mansion that had once been her home. Her thin shawl clung to her like second skin, soaked through and useless against the cold. One hand gripped the handle of a small suitcase, old, frayed, and trembling from the weight of everything she had managed to pack in just 10 minutes. The other hand instinctively shielded her swollen belly, as though trying to protect her unborn child from the storm that now existed both outside and within her. Behind the iron gates, the lights remained on. Music echoed from the terrace. She could still hear Kinza's laughter, sharp and mocking, like shattered glass. Aliza turned around, her eyes scanning the windows, silently hoping someone would come after her. That Ramiz would remember the vows he had once whispered beneath the wedding canopy. No one came. Her feet moved on instinct, splashing through muddy puddles along the paved road. She knocked on the gatehouse. The same security guard who used to tip his hat and rushed to open the gate now pretended to be asleep. She walked further, to the servant quarters tucked behind the estate. Familiar faces turned unfamiliar. The cook pretended not to hear her. The housemaid who once massaged her aching feet turned off the light and closed the curtain. "Ani, please, just let me sit for a while," Aliza pleaded with the old woman who lived in a nearby outhouse. "I'm pregnant. I'll leave by morning." But the woman's fear outweighed her sympathy. "Begum Sahiba, I'm sorry. Malik Ramiz will throw us all out if we help you." Soaked to the bone, shoes ruined, and hope dimming, Aliza wandered the streets until she reached a deserted bus stop shelter. Her legs gave way beneath her. She sank to the cold concrete bench, clutching her belly tightly. The baby moved. It was faint, like a whisper, a reminder that she wasn't alone. That giving up was not an option. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, her lips trembling. Hours passed. The rain kept falling. Traffic blurred past. No one stopped. Then a car slowed. A nurse, just finishing her night shift, spotted the shivering figure. Something in Aliza's eyes, maybe the absence of fear or the presence of something deeper, compelled the woman to pull over. "My God, you're burning up," the nurse said, crouching beside her. "Can you hear me?" Aliza nodded faintly. Within minutes, she was wrapped in a warm shawl and taken to a small private clinic. A kind doctor offered no questions, only care. She was given a bed, clean clothes, and warm soup. The baby's heartbeat echoed through the monitor, steady and strong. Words spread quickly. Servants whispered. Neighbors speculated. Socialites gossiped. "Did you hear? Ramiz Shah threw out his pregnant wife." But Ramiz had already prepared his version. In carefully planted press releases and staged interviews, he called it a mutual separation caused by Aliza's mental instability and erratic behavior during pregnancy. She was labeled fragile, unwell, and not in control of herself. The world believed him, but the truth was now alive, quietly kicking inside her womb. And Aliza, though broken, was not done yet. The Shah mansion had always been known for its grandeur, but when Begum Shanaz returned after 5 years abroad, she found a hollow palace echoing with silence. The servants stiffened at the sight of her. No one had expected her to return. Not this soon, not unannounced, and certainly not when the house was no longer Aliza's. She walked through the foyer slowly, her cane tapping lightly on the marble floor. The chandeliers sparkled, the vases brimmed with imported lilies, and everything looked immaculate, but there was something off. The air was too quiet, too calculated. In the drawing room, Kinza rose from a velvet couch like a coiled cat. She wore a deep emerald dress and a self-assured smile. "Begum Sahiba," she purred, walking forward with feigned affection. "Such a surprise. We thought you were staying in Istanbul another year." Shanaz gave a brief nod, eyes sharp behind gold-rimmed glasses. That was the plan. Kinza reached to hug her, but Shanaz stepped back. "Please don't touch me. I'm not fond of perfume that smells like deception." Kinza's smile faltered for the briefest second. Shanaz sat, folding her hands in her lap. "Where is Aliza?" Kinza feigned confusion. "Oh, she left." She wasn't adjusting well to the pressure. "You know how pregnancy can affect some women." Shanaz murmured, eyes narrowed. "And my son?"
Busy.
"Board meetings all day," Kinza replied smoothly, then added with a smirk, "But I'll have dinner arranged just for us. I'd love to show you what I've done with the main bedroom." Shanaz's lips tightened. Over the next 2 days, she observed everything. The staff avoided her eyes. Kinza floated around the house like a queen, and Ramiz, when he appeared, acted like a stranger, cold, formal, distracted. There was no mention of Aliza, no sign of the baby. Not even a photograph remained. Something was deeply wrong. That evening, she summoned the old housekeeper, Seyfera, into her study. "Tell me the truth," Shanaz said firmly. "No politics. No fear." Seyfera hesitated, wringing her hands. "Bibi, they threw her out. In the rain. With nothing but one suitcase." Shanaz's fingers clenched around her teacup. "Why didn't anyone stop them?" "We tried." Kinza threatened the staff. Malik Ramiz said it was family business. The next morning, Shanaz had her driver take her to the address Seyfera had whispered, a modest shelter on the edge of the city, where women with nowhere else to go found a bed, a meal, and temporary refuge. When she walked into the waiting area, she didn't recognize Aliza at first. The young woman curled on the bench was pale, her face swollen from crying, eyes sunken with sleepless nights. Her hands trembled slightly as she rested them over her belly. Her clothes hung loose on her frail body. Shanaz felt the breath leave her chest. Aliza looked up and froze. Her lips parted slightly, unsure whether to smile or cry. "Amy?" Shanaz stepped forward, sitting beside her without a word. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Shanaz gently reached for her hand. "He did this to you?" Aliza nodded, voice cracked. He said, "I wasn't good enough. That I embarrassed him. That she, Kinza, was more his kind of woman." Tears welled up in Shanaz's eyes. Not just for Aliza, but for herself. Because years ago, she too had sat bruised and humiliated on the cold marble floor of this very mansion. Her husband, Ramiz's father, had been powerful, brutal, and unforgiving. She had endured it all in silence. For the sake of family. For the sake of appearance. For the sake of her son. And now that son had become the same monster. "I should have stopped this before it began," Shanaz whispered. "I raised him to be strong, not cruel. I didn't teach him this." Aliza gently squeezed her hand. "You didn't fail, Amy. He did." Shanaz looked at her then, not as a daughter-in-law, not as a discarded woman, but as a survivor. And for the first time in decades, Begum Shanaz made a silent vow. She would not let history repeat itself. Not this time. The next morning, Begum Shanaz arrived at the law office in Gulberg with a calm face and a storm brewing behind her eyes. It had been years since she last sat in that room, a space filled with old leather chairs, dark wood furniture, and dusty portraits of men who built empires through silent wars and secret alliances. The Shah family's trusted lawyer, Barrister Usman Haroon, stood as soon as she entered. "Begum Sahiba, welcome," he said, bowing slightly. "I'm not here for pleasantries, Usman," she said, removing her gloves and settling into the leather chair opposite his desk. "I want to see my husband's will. The final version. The one signed after his last stroke." Usman hesitated, then nodded. "I thought you might ask that." He opened a file and slid a thick document toward her. As Shanaz began reading, her fingers slowed, her expression unreadable. Line by line, the legal jargon unfolded a truth that shocked even her. The mansion, the Shah ancestral estate, the very home where Ramiz now strutted around like a king with his mistress, had never been left to him. It was hers. "I don't understand," she murmured. Usman explained, "After your husband's final hospitalization, he made changes. Perhaps out of guilt, perhaps due to your years of silence. Whatever the reason, the legal ownership of the estate, along with a 40% stake in the Shah holdings, is in your name. Ramiz never knew. The paperwork was sealed per your husband's instructions, to be revealed only if he violated the family's honor." Shanaz sat back in her chair, stunned. He knew his son would fall. Usman gave a tight smile. He feared it. For a long time, Shanaz stared out the window. She could return today and reclaim everything. Kinza would be thrown out in minutes. Ramiz would be humiliated publicly. The narrative would flip. But something deeper stirred inside her. What happens when a man believes no one is watching? She asked aloud, more to herself than the lawyer. That's when you see his real face. She stood up and straightened her shawl. Don't file anything yet, she ordered. Usman frowned. You want to wait? I want to see how far he'll fall when he thinks he's untouchable. I want to know just how hollow he's become. Let the lie stand for now. She walked to the door, but paused before leaving. Prepare the transfer documents in secret. When I strike, it will be swift and public. Back at the mansion, Kinza was thriving. She redecorated Shanaz's sitting room into her influencer lounge. She threw champagne brunches for her elite circle, wore designer saris from head to toe, and treated the house staff like furniture. Ramiz, increasingly distant and distracted, didn't question her choices. He was busy salvaging business deals that were beginning to falter. Shanaz watched it all in silence. She played the dutiful mother, sipped tea, smiled politely, never raised her voice. But behind her calm exterior, she was laying a trap. She began recording conversations, collecting receipts, and watching who came in and out. She even hired a discreet investigator to trace Kinza's movements. Every piece was falling into place. The queen had returned to her castle, not to reclaim it, but to burn down the lies it now housed. The room was no bigger than a servant quarter. The ceiling fan squeaked. The windows didn't quite shut. The floor was chipped concrete, and the mattress thin. But to Aliza, this tiny space on the rooftop of a modest apartment complex felt like the beginning of something sacred. It was hers. After leaving the clinic, she had taken the small amount of money she had left, a few thousand rupees tucked into her dupatta by Nurse Sophia, and paid the first month's rent in advance. The landlady, a sharp but kind widow named Appa Bai, allowed her to stay without questions, moved by Aliza's pregnant silence and dignity. She sold the last piece of jewelry she had, her wedding bangles, and bought basic supplies: flour, sugar, butter, and an old second-hand oven. She had always baked as a hobby during her early days in the mansion: cinnamon rolls, cupcakes, date-filled cookies. The kitchen staff had praised her skills more than Ramiz ever had. Now, those skills would become her salvation. She started small, baking late into the night and selling to neighbors and shopkeepers in the area during the day. One of the younger tenants offered to set up an Instagram page for her. Aliza hesitated and used to the digital world, but agreed. At Rise Bakery by Aliza was born. At first, orders trickled in slowly, a birthday cake here, a dozen cookies there. But something about her story, her quiet strength, began resonating with women online. She never showed her full face. Only her hands, decorating a cake, kneading dough, packing boxes. But every caption spoke softly of starting again, of healing, of hope. Within weeks, she had a loyal following. Then a post went viral, a photo of a simple vanilla cupcake with a caption. I wasn't enough for him, so I became everything for myself. It was shared thousands of times. Women flooded her inbox with orders, prayers, and their own stories of betrayal and rebirth. She worked until her feet swelled. She napped in between deliveries. And every time her belly kicked, she smiled. You'll see, my little one, she whispered often to her unborn child. We're not broken. We're just beginning. On a rainy afternoon, much like the one she was thrown out in, her water broke. There was no one to drive her to the hospital. She called an online cab, clutching her hospital bag with one hand and her swollen belly with the other. Appa Bai insisted on coming along. It was a long, painful labor, but Aliza bore every scream, every contraction, with the strength of a woman who had already endured worse. When she heard the first cry, everything stopped. A nurse gently placed a tiny, warm baby girl in her arms. Eamon, she whispered. Your name is Eamon, because you are my faith come alive. She cried then, not from pain or sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. She had lost everything, and yet, in this moment, she had everything she ever needed. Back home, the bakery orders didn't stop. Even from her hospital bed, she managed communications, taking pre-orders, thanking her followers, and promising new recipes soon. Her followers grew into tens of thousands. 1 week later, on the morning of Eamon's Akika, a courier arrived at her door. A brown envelope. The divorce papers. From Ramiz. No note. No call. Just legal finality. She looked at them in silence for a long moment, then reached for her pen. She signed her name, not with tears, not with hesitation, but with a smile. A calm, quiet smile. That same afternoon, her phone buzzed repeatedly. Her bakery's Instagram page had just hit 10,000 followers. Orders were pouring in faster than she could count. She looked down at her daughter, cradled peacefully in her arms. Aliza had once been thrown away like nothing. Now, she had created something, a life, a name, a purpose from nothing. She had risen. The downfall didn't happen overnight, but when it came fast. Kinza had once walked into Ramiz's mansion with silent footsteps and seductive eyes. But now, she stomped through its halls in designer heels, throwing tantrums at the help and hosting lavish parties for people who only liked her for the champagne and the cameras. The media started catching on. Tabloids splashed headlines about Ramiz and his new trophy wife almost weekly. One day, it was her stumbling out of a club drunk. The next, a leaked video of her screaming at a waitress in a luxury hotel lobby. The charm that once blinded Ramiz now revealed its fangs. She bought without thinking, flaunted wealth they didn't yet have, and treated Ramiz's business connections as her personal network. At first, Ramiz laughed it off. She's young, he told his board. Let her enjoy. But the investors didn't laugh. Nor did the clients. One by one, long-term contracts were canceled. The brand's image, once sleek and respected, was now smeared with scandal. Then came the financial audit. Unexplained withdrawals. Dubious transfers. Company accounts mixed with Kinza's personal shopping. Tens of millions gone, siphoned out into luxury properties, handbags, private vacations, and foreign accounts. The staff at the mansion noticed the shift too. Salaries delayed. Kitchen budgets cut. The chef left. Then the gardener. Then the driver. Even the loyal butler who had once served Aliza silently packed his things and bowed out. Ramiz's empire, built on ego and illusion, began to crack under the weight of truth. Kinza was no longer sleeping in their bedroom. Her laughter had turned to irritation. Her smiles, cold and rehearsed. Then one morning, Ramiz woke up to an empty house. Kinza was gone. So was his luxury watch collection. So was the briefcase with backup contracts. And every rupee in their joint accounts. No note. No explanation. Only silence. Panic set in. He called her. No answer. He tried her manager, her friends. No one had seen her in days. A friend finally messaged him. She's in Dubai. With someone new. Ramiz smashed the phone against the wall. His days blurred into drinking and denial. He sat in the grand living room, curtains drawn, sipping whiskey, watching the empire he once ruled turn into ashes. The mansion echoed with absence. No servants, no wife, no baby. Just him and the ghosts of what he had thrown away. The final blow came from the bank. He was informed his access to the property was under review. Confused and furious, he stormed into the lawyer's office, only to be handed a copy of the will. The original owner of the estate, his late father, had left it entirely in Begum Shanaz's name. The documents had always been there. He had just assumed, like he did with everything, that it was his by right. Shaking, disheveled, and desperate, he drove to his mother's ancestral house. For once, he didn't arrive in a luxury car. There was no chauffeur, no swagger, only shame. He rang the bell like a schoolboy who knew he'd failed. Begum Shanaz opened the door herself. She was dressed in an elegant shawl, her face calm, composed. He opened his mouth to speak, but she raised her hand. Behind her, a servant stepped forward with a set of keys on a silver tray. "Looking for these?" she asked. Ramiz reached out instinctively, but instead of placing them in his palm, Shanaz turned and handed them to a young woman stepping out of the back room. It was Aliza, dressed modestly, baby Eamon in her arms, her expression unreadable. "This house," Shanaz said coldly, belongs to someone who knows its worth. Ramiz stood frozen at the threshold, not allowed in, not welcome. His mother turned her back. And the door shut, with a finality he had never known before. The morning sun spilled like honey over the grand gates of the mansion, the same gates that had once closed on Aliza as she stood outside, bruised, betrayed, and pregnant. But today, they opened for her. A hush of anticipation lingered in the air as the staff, lined up on either side of the entrance, waited with soft smiles and hopeful eyes. The air felt lighter,
Cleaner.
as if the walls of the house itself knew change was coming. Aliza stood still for a moment, baby Eamon in her arms, her other hand gently holding Begum Shanaz. Shanaz stepped forward and placed a gleaming brass key into Aliza's palm. "This house was built with blood and sacrifice," she said quietly. "It deserves someone who understands both." Aliza's fingers closed around the key, not with triumph, but with quiet strength. The iron gates creaked open. She walked through them slowly, each step a reclamation of dignity, of voice, of power. The marble floors that once echoed with her silence now welcomed her return with pride. The same maid who had turned her face away during Aliza's lowest days now bowed respectfully. The gardener who had watched helplessly from the hedges as she was dragged out now offered her a flower from the rose bush he had planted the year she first came as a bride. Inside, the house felt different. Not just because of the absence of Kinza's gaudy decor, but because the energy had shifted. This was no longer Ramiz's kingdom. It was hers. Aliza gently placed Eamon in the antique cradle in the nursery, the same one Ramiz had refused to decorate for their child. She touched the frame, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "This is your home now." Outside, just beyond the gates, Ramiz stood, a broken silhouette in the distance. He hadn't left. Couldn't. His eyes were hollow, his clothes wrinkled, his pride completely stripped. He watched as Aliza entered the mansion, the woman he had once dismissed, now holding everything he had lost. Begum Shanaz walked up to him. Her shawl fluttered gently in the breeze, her face stern, unreadable. He opened his mouth to plead, but she didn't give him the chance. Instead, she looked him in the eye, and with a voice that cut deeper than any scream, said, "You threw away gold for glitter." Ramiz lowered his gaze, ashamed. But no mercy followed. She turned her back and walked away, leaving him behind the iron gates, the same gates he had once shut on Aliza, now closing on him. This time, justice didn't come with fists or fire. It came with keys. The grand mansion, once echoing with coldness and pride, now buzzed with warmth and purpose. Laughter of children echoed through the gardens. The kitchen, once a place of control and silence, now smelled of freshly baked bread and hope. The mansion had become a shelter for single mothers, a haven for those who had been thrown away, just as Aliza once was. Today, it shimmered with celebration. Lanterns swayed gently in the evening breeze as women, once broken by betrayal, stood tall and smiling beside their children. Volunteers moved through the courtyard, handing out refreshments. Media cameras flashed. The atmosphere was dignified, glowing. At the center of it all stood Aliza, in a deep emerald sari, her daughter Eamon in her arms, both radiant, both symbols of survival and grace. She welcomed guests with poise, humility, and an inner strength that shone through every gesture. Inside the entrance hallway, a newly framed quote hung proudly above the fireplace. Visitors paused to read it, some smiling, others tearful. "The woman you kicked out built an empire right where you left her." It was not just a statement, it was a promise. As the event continued, a figure passed quietly along the sidewalk outside the mansion walls. Ramiz.